Welcome to the Wolffpack Fitness Podcast with your host, Adrian Wolff. I'm a PhD student in interdisciplinary health sciences with a master's degree in kinesiology and a bachelor's degree in psychology. I've been a fitness coach for over 10 years and I've trained everyone from everyday gym goers to kids to Division I collegiate and professional athletes. My mission is to provide you with actionable knowledge in the areas of fitness, nutrition, stress management, and psychology to help you live your best life every day. Let's get to the show. What's going on, Wolffpack? Welcome back to another episode of the Wolffpack Fitness Podcast with me, your host, Adrian Wolff. So it's been a while. I've been pretty busy. So I've had a number of different projects going on. Schoolwork's been picking up recently. The fall semester is about to start, so I'm going to be pretty busy with that. And I've also been pretty busy promoting my new book, which I'll tell you about in a second. So going forward with the podcast, I hope to do as many as I can for you guys, but I'm going to just kind of take it as it goes and seeing how many I could squeeze in whenever I have some more free time. But definitely want to keep getting content out for you guys, and I know you're going to like this particular episode. So before I get into it, let me tell you a little bit about the book and what I've been getting into. So the book is called Awareness Before Action, and it's primarily written for people who are struggling with developing and maintaining a healthy lifestyle consisting of regular exercise, optimal food choices, and stress reduction methods. It emphasizes the psychology behind what it takes to live a healthy lifestyle and how to change the way you think about exercise and nutrition to make them more enjoyable aspects of your life rather than excruciating chores. If you're already living a healthy lifestyle and you like where you're currently at with your health, this book is still a valuable quick read that you can gain a ton of useful information from to make your own life and decision making easier. I'm sure you also know plenty of people who are struggling with exercise, nutrition, stress management, or maybe all of these aspects of healthy living. After you read the book, write a short review for me on Amazon, then share it with people you know to start making a positive impact on your community. So you can buy the book on Amazon in hardcover, paperback, or Kindle formats, and I'm currently working on getting the audio version up on Audible. So it's going to take me some time to edit and make sure it's good to go for the people in charge over there to get it all set up and ready to go for release as an audiobook, but I'll let you know when it's released. And if you've read the book or you're currently reading it and you love it, please submit a rating or review on Amazon to help the book gain more visibility. I'd really, really appreciate it. All right, so for today's podcast, before I begin, if you're liking the content I'm providing, I know it's been a while, but please pause this episode, follow my podcast, and submit a quick rating if you're listening on Spotify, or a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. Also, don't forget to share the podcast with your friends and family. I want to thank you for continuing to listen and helping me grow my podcast. Before I get into the episode, I also want to make it known that this podcast is separate from my teaching and research roles at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. All right, so in this episode, I'm going to discuss a pretty in-depth scientific review article that discusses the role that food additives play in your gut health and your overall health. This particular review article was published in the scientific journal Microorganisms in 2022. And the title is Food Additives, a Key Environmental Factor in the Development of IBD, which is Inflammatory Bowel Disease, through Gut Dysbiosis. So what a review article intends to do is synthesize many studies on the same topic to provide a general recommendation based on the research studies that have already been completed. So the authors, they do a big search, and they narrow down that search to the most relevant research studies on their particular topic that they want to learn more about and share with their readers, other scientists, nutritionists, coaches, even the general public, whoever it might be. So in this article, They wanted to look at the potential role of different artificial food additives in the pathogenesis, which is how a disease develops and progresses, and the pathogenesis of inflammatory bowel diseases. I'll refer to those as IBDs from now on in this episode. And a couple of those IBDs that you might be familiar with are ulcerative colitis, or UC, and Crohn's disease, or CD. So UC causes inflammation and sores or ulcers in the lining of the colon, which is your large intestine. And CD causes chronic inflammation of the digestive tract, which can affect any part of the GI tract, which is your gastrointestinal tract, but most often involves the lower small intestine, known as the ileum, and the beginning of the large intestine, known as the cecum. This information is also applicable to you if you don't have one of these conditions, but you're at risk of developing them through genetic predispositions or lifestyle factors. In general, you want to keep your gut as healthy as possible to avoid them. But if you do have one of these conditions, you definitely want to pay special attention. First, I'm going to give you an overview of the digestive system so you're familiar with a lot of the terms I'm going to be talking about, and to give you a better visual of how the digestive system works, what's involved, what the different areas of the digestive system are. So the entire digestive system is called the GI tract, or gastrointestinal tract. That starts at the mouth. So whenever we eat food or drink water, whatever it is, digestion starts in the mouth. And then that food is transferred down through the esophagus to the stomach. After it leaves the stomach, it gets into the small intestine. And the small intestine is broken up into 3 different parts. The first part is called the duodenum, second part is called the jejunum, and third part is called the ileum. Then the food transfers to the large intestine or colon, which also has a bunch of different parts. So that first part is called the cecum, and then the way the large intestine or colon is oriented around the small intestine is it goes straight up, across, and then down on the other side, and then, of course, out. So the first part, like I said, is the cecum. That leads to the ascending colon, so that food travels upwards. Then it goes through the transverse colon, which goes across on the upper portion of the small intestine. And then it goes through the descending colon, so it goes down the other side. And then through something called the sigmoid colon, where it kind of curves around a little bit, and then out the rest of the way. I'll let you use your imagination. Within the intestine, there are different layers as well. So the area, the space that the food and the drink or fluid travels through is called the lumen. The area that is the first layer of the intestines that is directly in contact with the lumen and that food and fluid is known as the mucosa. And the mucosa is composed of a lot of cells that are located in the first layer known as the epithelium. So those epithelial cells are in direct contact with the food and fluid, and they have a bunch of different jobs. And one of those is to help with nutrient absorption. So if you move a little bit further away from the lumen and where the food and fluid is located within the intestine, the next layer out is known as the lamina propria, and then the muscularis mucosa. So the muscularis mucosa helps increase the surface area within the intestinal lining and helps create folds. And these folds within that intestinal lining help increase how many nutrients can be absorbed throughout the intestine. So the next layer out is called the submucosa. That's where a lot of blood and lymphatic vessels are located, also nerves and specific glands. And then the next layer out is the muscularis, which is the muscular layer responsible for movement and mixing of food particles, also known as peristalsis. So whenever those muscles contract, they're called smooth muscles. Those are not under our voluntary control. They contract to move food along through our digestive tract. And then the final layer out is called the serosa, which is something known as a serous membrane, which reduces friction and it protects the organs from rubbing against each other, so it lubricates everything and it keeps everything sliding and gliding past each other appropriately. So in these types of conditions, much of the inflammation occurs within the mucosal layer. That's that first layer in contact with the lumen of the intestines. And this inflammation is due to an abnormal mucosal response to intestinal microbiota. So microbiota are the ecosystem of microbes living within your intestines. And there are a lot of them. But there are three broad classifications of microbes, and those are yeast, viruses, and bacteria. And bacteria are classified using what's called a taxonomy, which is basically a ranking system. So the first level of classification, I'm going to try not to get too deep on you guys, but I do want to give you some background here because it is important to understand the microbiome. So the first classification, think broader classification, which then can be broken down into simpler parts. So first classification is known as the phylum, and it's a level of classification used to group organisms based on their body structure and development. That can be broken down into classes, which groups organisms that share a set of common characteristics and are more closely related to each other than to organisms in other classes within the same phylum. Those can be broken down into orders, which groups several related families together based on shared overarching characteristics and common ancestry. Those, once again, can be broken down into families, which groups together one or more closely related genera that share a significant number of common traits, and the genera groups several closely related species that share a recent common ancestor, which are the most basic and fundamental unit for classifying living organisms. So if we talk about the first level of classification, the phyla, there are particular dominant gut microbial phyla that are located within our digestive system. So some of these, they're pretty hard to pronounce, but I'll give them to you anyway. Some of these are known as the Firmicutes, Bacteroides, Actinobacteria, Proteobacteria, Fusobacteria, and Verrucomicrobia. The Firmicutes and Bacteroides represent 90% of your gut microbiota, with the other ones comprising the rest of it. So your ecosystem diversity is largely dictated by your dietary habits. So when I say diversity, I mean how much of each one of these phyla are located within your gut and in what proportions. And that really dictates your overall health. So your dietary habits influence the proportions of these microbes, the regulation of inflammation within your gut, and also how your immune system functions and responds to different pathogens. The Western, or Standard American diet, also abbreviated as SAD, is composed of many ultra-processed foods or products, which I also discuss in my book. These ultra-processed products have a mixture of non-nutritive ingredients and additives, and these additives are used to improve or maintain freshness, shelf life, taste, texture, or appearance of the product. So now I want to discuss some of the most common additives and their potential impacts on your gut. Let's start off with artificial sweeteners. So this is one of the big ones that the authors discuss in that review article I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. So these artificial sweeteners are also known as non-nutritive sweeteners because they don't provide any nutritive value. And they're found in lots of food and beverages. And they're often recommended for body weight reduction in type 2 diabetes and people with glucose intolerance, or people who can't use glucose or blood sugar effectively. So some of these additives that the FDA has approved are aspartame, which is also known as E951 in Europe. So in Europe, they have numbers to show safety testing and to identify them. So each one of these additives also has that letter and number identification associated with them. But I won't list all the numbers just to keep it simple for you guys. So the next one is saccharin. There's also sucralose, acesulfame potassium, and neotame. So let's talk about some of the studies that the authors reviewed in this research article. So a lot of them were animal studies, but there were some human studies as well. A lot of animal studies are done specifically in mice because mice and humans share approximately 85% of their DNA. So they're very easy to study and make conclusions about what might happen in humans as well. So some of the mouse studies in this article showed a reduction in bacterial biodiversity with an alteration of bacterial communities leading to dysbiosis after consumption of acesulfame potassium, sucrose, Splenda, aspartame, and neotame. So more specifically, some studies have shown that sucralose consumption can lead to intestinal microbial changes with an increase in the abundance of E. coli, Shigella, and Bilofa in mice. Some strains of E. coli can produce toxins that damage the intestinal lining, causing inflammation and discomfort. Shigella is known to cause diarrhea or loose stool and can result in an intestinal infection known as shigellosis. Too much growth of Bilofa can also result in inflammation, gut barrier dysfunction, and metabolic issues like high blood sugar and fatty liver. Furthermore, Splenda consumption can promote dysbiosis with the expansion of proteobacteria, with an overgrowth being linked to inflammation and conditions like colorectal cancer and metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome is a combination of 3 or more of 5 symptoms like high blood pressure, large waist circumference, high triglycerides, low HDL, and high fasting blood glucose that puts you at an increased risk for cardiovascular disease and diabetes. So Splenda consumption can also promote overgrowth of E. coli and increase something called myeloperoxidase, which is an enzyme found in neutrophils and monocytes, which are white blood cells, and plays a crucial role in the immune system's defense against pathogens. But too much of this myeloperoxidase can start to contribute to tissue damage and promote inflammation. There also were a few human studies discussed. They looked at something called short-chain fatty acids, or FCFA, production. So these short-chain fatty acids are the products of bacterial fermentation of dietary fiber in the colon, and they act as anti-inflammatory metabolites and are an important energy source for intestinal epithelial cells and can strengthen the gut barrier function. So you remember in the beginning when I was talking to you about the epithelium. That is that first layer of cells directly in contact with the lumen or the food product that's traveling through your intestine. So having those cells be strong and healthy to make sure that you're processing that food and nutrients appropriately is extremely important. So some of the short-chain fatty acids are acetate, propionate, and butyrate. So in these studies, healthy volunteers were examined after the consumption of aspartame and sucralose, and the daily consumption of these two additives was less than 20% of the FDA's acceptable daily intake, and the duration was only 10 weeks, so that's important to keep in mind. The researchers found a minimal effect on any microbiome or short-chain fatty acid production changes, suggesting that the overall quantity and duration of additive consumption is more important to consider rather than eliminating them altogether. Also, currently, there tend to be not a lot of human studies with this kind of stuff for ethical reasons. So they see these food additives having adverse impacts on the animal digestive tract, so there are understandable ethical concerns when testing them on humans in elevated quantities and for longer periods of time. So that's definitely something to keep in mind there. So next is emulsifiers. And those are added in a wide variety of foods to enhance texture by blending ingredients that normally wouldn't mix and to extend shelf life. So some studies show an increase in E. coli and Shigella after carrageenan kappa consumption and also inhibition or hindered growth of bifidobacterium by polysorbate 80 and carrageenan kappa. Now, bifidobacterium are important bacteria that metabolize complex carbohydrates, they produce beneficial short-chain fatty acids, they synthesize B vitamins and vitamin K, and maintain a healthy gut barrier by enhancing mucus production and protection against pathogens. So you definitely do not want inhibition of this type of bacterium in your gut by any food additives. So these findings were from human in vitro studies, which means there were samples from humans exposed to emulsifiers outside of the individual, rather than in vivo within the individual. Once again, going back to being careful to not expose human subjects to too much of these additives for too long a time. Carrageenan has also been shown to decrease levels of the anti-inflammatory bacterium Akkermansia muciniphila, which is a beneficial bacterium as well, and it helps strengthen the intestinal barrier and produces short-chain fatty acids. So once again, decreasing levels of this sort of bacterium is not a great thing. Other human studies looked at the effect of 20 emulsifiers on microbiota. Some of those emulsifiers included maltodextrin, xanthan gum, sorbitol monostearate, glycerol stearate, all of which increased lipopolysaccharide levels, and carrageenans, which increased flagellin levels. Now, lipopolysaccharides and flagellin are indirect indicators of gut permeability. So higher levels of them indicate more permeability in your gut. Also, the additive carboxymethylcellulose, or CMC, has been studied in humans. It was found to reduce bacterial gut diversity and beneficial short-chain fatty acids. Once again, reduction of bacterial gut diversity is not a good thing. You want your gut to have a large diversity of these microbes. And most emulsifiers can promote inflammation and development or exacerbation of chronic IBDs. Next is food colorants. Those are added to food mainly to make up for color losses following exposure to light, air, and temperature variations. Manufacturers want to make the foods look more appetizing with these food colorants. One common additive is titanium dioxide, or TiO2, coded as E171. In 2021, the panel of the European Food Safety Authority, or EPSA, concluded that E171 can no longer be considered safe when used as a food additive. It's definitely something you want to keep in mind. Its nanoparticles were present in sauces, cheeses, skim milk, ice cream, coating for sweets, and chewing gum. Some human in vitro studies have found that these nanoparticles can damage intestinal microvilli structure and alter epithelial integrity. So what does that mean? I haven't talked about microvilli yet. So imagine that mucosa layer, that first layer in contact with the lumen and the food within your gut. Remember that muscularis mucosa layer I was talking about that gives that layer its folds for increased surface area. So those folds are called villi, and those villi contain specialized cells that help with nutrient absorption. And those cells contain microvilli, which further increases the surface area that the nutrients can pass through for maximal absorption. So you definitely don't want those structures to be damaged in any way, and you want them to maintain their integrity. Also, dyes like red 40 and yellow 6 have been shown to trigger IBD-like colitis, which is inflammation in the large intestine. And this has been shown in mice when they expressed more of a certain type of pro-inflammatory protein from their immune cells known as interleukin 23 or IL-23. This means that you may be more susceptible to the effects of these dyes if you have a certain genetic or DNA variation known as a single nucleotide polymorphism or SNP in your IL-23R gene, which you would need genetic testing to determine. Last is food preservatives. These are a group of agents added to prevent the natural deterioration of food due to microorganism growth. So sulfites are the first one, and they have been shown to inhibit normal gut microbiota bacterial species. And Antimicrobial agents like sodium benzoate, sodium nitrate, and potassium sorbate can induce human dysbiosis by reducing microbial biodiversity. In particular, some common human gut microbes with known anti-inflammatory effects, such as Bacteroides capricola, Clostridium tyrobutyrisum, and Lactobacillus paracasei, are more sensitive to those common antimicrobial preservatives than other pro-inflammatory microbes. So are there any additives that might be beneficial? As a matter of fact, yes. One of those is antioxidants. For example, phenolic acids and flavonoids. So antioxidants are natural compounds present in fruits, vegetables, spices, honey, etc. Some studies have shown the capacity of these antioxidants, such as caffeic acid, to reduce the severity of bowel damage and suppress inflammatory cytokines, which are a type of protein. There's also ferulic acid, which has shown a reduction in colitis, and also sinapic acid, which showed a reduction in tumor necrosis factor alpha, or TNF alpha, which is a pro-inflammatory cytokine, and myeloperoxidase production, which is once again an enzyme found in a particular type of white blood cell, and when it's elevated, it can result in tissue damage and inflammation. So it's a good thing that sinapic acid has that effect of reducing it. And also chlorogenic acid can increase microbial abundance of Akkermansia and lactobacillus, and a decrease in pro-inflammatory species involved in IBD, like E. coli and Salmonella. Interestingly, some emulsifiers like glycerol monolaurate, rapeseed lecithin, and soy lecithin can have a positive impact on gut microbiota composition in certain circumstances. Studies have shown a low-dose supplementation of glycerol monolaurate can promote dysbiosis in mice fed a low-fat diet, but can improve gut microbiota dysbiosis when eating a high-fat diet. Other mouse studies have shown an increase in the beneficial Clostridium leptum bacteria after consumption of rapeseed and soy lecithin, leading to more production of short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. So what's the take-home message here from all this stuff? Many food additives in ultra-processed products common in the SAD or Western diet, including artificial sweeteners, emulsifiers, colorants, and preservatives, have demonstrated the ability to disrupt proper functioning and anatomical structure of the gut lining in mostly animal, but also a fair amount of human studies. These additives can exacerbate chronic conditions like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, and may contribute to their development in people who have not yet been diagnosed. They do this by creating an imbalance between harmful and beneficial microbes within the gut, resulting in chronic inflammation, damage to the lining of the gut, and eventually other symptoms that become more noticeable if not corrected. However, some additives like the sweetener stevia, antioxidants, and specific emulsifiers like soy and rapeseed lecithin may have beneficial effects, so it's important to look at ingredient labels on your foods before you buy them. This leads me to your action item for the week. If you're buying food or drink products with a nutrition label, start to become more aware of the additives that are present in the product. Look at the ingredient label in its entirety and identify some of the common offenders I discussed in this episode. Start to avoid them and substitute them for a healthier option like a less processed product without those additives, or whole foods, which are your best option. And start to limit the frequency and quantity of desserts, sweets, cakes, ultra-processed meat products like hot dogs and chicken nuggets, savory snacks like chips, and soft drinks like sodas that you're consuming. That's all for today, Wolffpack. If you're liking the content, please follow and rate the show on Spotify, or leave me a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, and introduce the show to your friends and family. I would also love for you to leave a comment about any additional topics you would like to learn about in the areas of fitness, nutrition, stress management, or psychology. You can also find me on social media on Instagram at coach_awolf and YouTube at Wolffpack Fitness. Thanks for listening. Go get your action item done and tune in for the next episode. Take care. Thank you for listening. If you like the content, be sure to follow my podcast, leave a review, and check out the show notes for additional details and links discussed in this episode. My mission is to provide you with actionable knowledge in the areas of fitness, nutrition, stress management, and psychology. It is often said that knowledge is power, but I like to say that knowledge applied is even more powerful. Take what you learned today and find a way to apply it to your lifestyle so you can continue living your best life. Thanks, and be sure to activate the new episode notifications to be the first to learn about new and exciting content. See you next time.